Welcome to The Being Guide, the lifestyle podcast that celebrates diversity of thought on all things health, wellness, and being. I'm your host, Charlotte Horn. Join me as I indulge my curiosity through candid conversations about health and life, with people who represent a whole spectrum of ideologies on what it means to be well. I'll be finding out what being means to each of them as they generously share their stories and leave us with insights that can be applied in the context of our everyday lives. Together, we seek to make sense of the paradoxes, raise awareness of the resources, and normalize conversations about the things that we are all thinking and feeling. It's not a one-size-fits-all, so take what you need and enjoy the show. My guest on today's episode is Kimberly Warner. Kimberly is a film producer living in Portland, Oregon. In 2015, her life turned upside down when she was struck down by a mysterious illness, which was much later diagnosed as rare neurological disorder, Maladie-Debarkman syndrome, or MDD. MDD is an incurable vestibular condition which leaves sufferers in a state of physical instability, which manifests as a sensation of constant rocking, bobbing, and swaying, as though on a boat. After embarking upon an unrelenting mission to find a fix, Kimberly realized that the chase was only serving to make her feel worse. So she changed tact and decided to learn how to say yes. Yes to the messy, uncomfortable, painful journey of being alive. This shift in mindset led Kimberly to found Unfixed Media, a production company on a mission to connect with and advocate for other sufferers of chronic illness. Unfixed focuses on stories of humans living with chronic, incurable conditions in the hope of uncovering insights and universal truths that can encourage us all to live more fully and radically unfixed. Her current productions include the Unfixed docuseries, the Life Rebalanced Chronicles, MS Confidential, the Unfixed podcast, and a feature documentary film called Why We Matter. In addition to all her work with the Unfixed community, Kimberly is a member of the Patient and Physician Advocacy Alliance, is on the editorial board of the Journal of Health Design, and was the 2020 recipient of the Invisible Disabilities Association's Media Impact Award. Today, we'll be talking about what it means to be unfixed, how our imperfections connect us, and how to re-find your sense of self in the midst or wake of trauma. Kimberly Warner, it's so great to have you on the show.
I'm so happy to be here. I thank you for that lovely intro too. It's always, it's been a long journey. So sometimes it's nice to hear it all summarized in a paragraph.
Well, I have probably done it no justice whatsoever. So I might just dive straight in and sort of hand over to you so that you can tell us a little bit about you and your journey, and I guess how Unfixed Media came to be.
My goodness. Well, like I said, it's been a 6-year journey, but it feels like a lifetime. And you reminded me as you were doing the intro of, you've probably experienced the Chinese finger traps. Have you ever heard of that expression? Or
no, I haven't actually.
It's just this little game. I remember as a kid, it's some mechanism where you put your finger in it, and the harder you pull out, the more it clamps down on your finger. And so the game is to try to get your finger out. And, you have to kind of like really gently, almost passively pull it out. And that is, to me, what this journey with Maladie-Debarkman was early on. I was pulling and pulling and pulling. My background, I had 2.5 years in naturopathic medical school. And prior to that, I was in pre-med. I grew up in a very wellness-oriented family. Our bookshelves were filled with self-help and self-improvement. I was full-on self-help from like the age of 8. I thought that was the goal in life and that everything had a fix. And I even, I had other things happen in my life that were so completely out of control, like a father who died in a car accident, things like that. But I was still able to kind of fix it in my brain, like analyze it and make meaning from it. And when I came down with Maladie-Debarkman syndrome, everything that I had ever done before stopped working. It tore me apart to the point where I lost my identity. I lost faith in the universe. I felt like I was abandoned by, I had sort of this magical thinking for a long time that maybe the world, just listened to you and answered your prayers. And I felt completely alone for the first time. So, there was a place where I became so physically exhausted by the efforting and the searching and the hope that comes every time you try a new treatment or you meet with a new physician and they say, I have an answer for you. Just do this for 6 weeks or 2 months and you'll be better. That the final physician that I approached, she was a naturopath and I actually still see her. But I met her in tears and I felt truly that I didn't want to live with this anymore. I didn't know how. My life had fallen apart. I hadn't worked in 2.5 years. My relationship with my husband was falling apart. We'd moved because I could no longer live in the city. And just for anybody who doesn't know, what these experiences of vestibular disorders in general are, it's your nervous system early on does not know how to relax with the experience. It's basically, we're hardwired to go, something's wrong here, So our nervous system is in this constant state of fight or flight, or freeze. And it's really, really hard to initially get our nervous systems to calm down with these sensations because it's as if we're in an earthquake or as if the floor is dropping out all the time. And so I met this physician and she was the first person that didn't give me an answer. She didn't say, let's try this protocol because I know in 3 months this is going to get better. But she kind of backed up and worked with some things that were known. And it was a slow and steady process that took years. And like I said, I still see her. Mm-hmm. But I needed that slowing down. And I needed that pause of having to have a fix. I needed to integrate what feeling bad was in my life and learning that was okay. I mean, 10 is horrible. 10 sucks. But if we can have an 8 is better. But let's not try for 1. Let's not try for 0. Let's just try for 8 on the pain scale for a while. So, fast forward 6 years, I fluctuate now between 0. I have had 0 days and I have had 6 days still. But what I do have now is much more resilience around the discomfort with it.
Mm-hmm. So let's jump back to 2015, was it, that the symptoms started?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So 2015, and I mentioned in the intro that it was only fairly recently that you actually got a diagnosis. So in the last couple of years that you actually had the diagnosis of MDD.
Mm-hmm. We call it MDDS here in the States.
MDDS. Okay.
MDDS. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you. As humans who tend to, not like to operate in this gray area, in the abstract of unknown and, unfamiliar territory, how was that for you? How did you navigate that space in between you first getting your symptoms back in 2015 through to receiving that diagnosis?
That was the hardest part, not knowing and looking totally normal the entire time, because illness is very isolating. Illness is a very lonely journey, and it is exponentially more lonely when nobody can understand what you're going through. They can't Google it. Yeah. All they know is that you're canceling all your plans with them. All they know is that you're not seeing them anymore. All they know is that you're in bed most of the day. It's really for any of us, myself included, if I had a friend that suddenly looked normal, but suddenly was just backing out of life, I would start to question it if she didn't have an answer. So I just isolated. I removed myself from the world. I moved in with my mother for 7 years. I mean, 7 years, sorry, 7 months.
Yeah.
No, not 7 years. But I moved in with her. Granted, I moved in because she lived in Boulder, Colorado, which is like healing mecca of the United States. And so we had a long list of like, let's go to these healers.
Yeah.
So I went to her place thinking I was going to come home 7 months later healed. It did not. I felt just as bad as the day I left. And I came home to my husband. We were working really hard to stay connected. But he's a man. He's very logical. He wanted answers. He didn't understand what was happening. It was so isolating. And I'm a very logical person too. I have a background in science, and I did start to wonder, was I losing my mind? Was I going crazy? Because how could I possibly feel so incapable? I was a perfectionist, straight A's, valedictorian, medical school. I was like, everything, you figure it out. And suddenly I couldn't sleep. I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. I could barely walk down the sidewalk. And when I did, I would have a backpack with a water bottle and a sandwich, and I'd walk straight to the ER, and I'd sit in front of the ER in case I blacked out and fell over. At least somebody there would find me instead of being alone in the house. I was a mess, total mess. And I still have days like that where I'm like, should I be walking right now on this hard concrete? Am I going to fall over? So it's destabilized me in a way that I'd never experienced before. And not having a diagnosis, not having a community of people that understood exactly everything that I've just shared with you. I have now heard from those people. I didn't have any validation, none.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I guess, how did that change your relationship with the wellness in the medical world? Because I can only imagine how frustrating it must have been for you to be, banging on every door and looking for answers, but not finding any definitive, this is what you've got, these are the next steps. It's seriously operating in the abstract, as I said before. Has that changed your relationship with the way that you perceive the kind of wellness in the medical world?
It did. But not only that, it's interesting because it also changed how I perceive spirituality. It changed how I perceive the self-help movement. It changed how I perceive natural medicine, because I wasn't just seeing Western medical doctors. I was seeing everybody under the sun, and they all took me for a ride. Not because they were ill-intended, but because nobody wanted to say, I don't know what's wrong with you. Or do the research to find out, because it's rare, but it's not that rare. So I lost faith in everything. And I truly mean everything. I felt like, I go back to that word again, I felt abandoned by the universe. Like this somehow, something is irreparably flawed within my soul because nothing is working. And all the positive thinking in the world is not going to change this. So I really got to a point of feeling very cynical of any sort of answer. Yeah.
And I think it's completely a very valid stance to take, the cynicism that comes with living with something that's so unexplained after having had, your entire life prior to that, finding answers and being able to reconcile really difficult things in your mind. But then you've come up against something that's truly tested you. And I think it's a testament to who you are as a person, because the way that you approach life is, yeah, quite extraordinary. What I think I've kind of noticed about you is, I would say that you're a realist. That comes across. You don't sugarcoat things. You say it how it is, but it comes with an air of optimism as well. So as much as you're not kind of, you know, trying to positive think your way out of the situation, you still, at least from my perception, come across as a person who is warm and open and, you know, continues to be curious. Was that in line with who you were, I guess, your sense of self prior to the diagnosis and your sense of self now? Because I know you've mentioned before about how, you know, you completely lost your sense of self in that time. And I guess I'm just interested to know how that's evolved and if you kind of see similarities between the Kimberly pre-diagnosis and post-diagnosis.
You know, that's the thank you for saying all of that. And you're right. I do have a very optimistic outlook on life. And I would say the foundation of that, and without sounding like, you know, unicorn sunshine, but the foundation of it is love. And to me, that is pre-diagnosis Kimberly too, but it didn't have the depth to it. I have, ever since I was 19, and I read this book by Pema Chodron, which was called The Wisdom of No Escape. She's a Buddhist monk from Canada. And it basically is to, you know, the philosophy of embracing your experience as it is. And as a former perfectionist, that was like a big gong over my head. I was like, what? How do you embrace your experience? What do you mean? You got to like improve your experience.
Yeah. Classic self-help literature and mindset. Yeah, we've got to be better all the time.
all the time. So she planted this seed in me around allowing the experience. But I think somehow in my young trying to be clever brain, it was, well, if I do that, then that means that I also won't suffer. And what I didn't understand is that it doesn't eliminate the suffering. You know, the suffering is going to be there, and you still expand around that and allow the suffering to exist, to coexist. So I think I thought like, okay, I'm all into this, like embracing what is thing, because it's going to ultimately make me not suffer. Right. Mm-hmm. But I needed to have this experience. So now I am similar to how I was then, but now it's a bigger definition of what that holding an experience actually means.
Mm-hmm. And how do you allow, I guess, the reality of the situation that you're in, and, you know, the day-to-day and the management of, you know, the sensations and the feelings that you're experiencing, how do you find peace with that and learn to kind of coexist with that experience, which, you know, is, you know, less than ideal, if we're being honest? You know, it would be great if you were to wake up in the morning and not feel like you were rocking or on a boat. How do you kind of find that peace with the acceptance of what is, whilst kind of maintaining that hope, I guess?
Yeah, it's that have the acronym, and I use it a lot, and it's TLO. Trust, let go, open to the experience. And for me, that is the starting point. First, trust. Just trust that most likely you're not going to fall over. And if you do, you'll be fine, right? So let go. Just let your nervous system fully experience these yucky, awful experiences. Just let it go and experience it, and open to the experience of all that. To me, it also it's, you know, if you've done any meditation, it's that blue sky experience. So the storm is happening, the rocking is happening, the anxious sensations are happening, but that's not all that's happening. And there are two channels for me that can coexist and happen at the same time. And the other one is the awareness that it's all happening. And the awareness is totally still. The awareness is holding it all. And if I'm having that's my refuge, is, just go to the awareness of all the experience and know that the awareness is still. And it doesn't take the awfulness away. It's just kind of a muscle that I've had to develop almost to be able to hold both of them. And I'm like not enlightened. I'm like, this is a lifetime practice. This is a lifetime journey of going.
Is meditation something that you do on a daily basis? Is that something that's part of your practice?
I can't, because
that's what I was going to ask. Like, so many of the principles of meditation are around cultivating balance and stillness, and we're told that it solves all of our life's problems, but in your case, where it's a kind of visceral feeling, trying to actually metaphorically cultivate any level of balance or stillness must just be just a whole other ball game.
It's almost, a lot of us that have this disorder, we laugh at the notion of going within. You go to a yoga class and just go within, and we're going to do some stress management here. Just first start with your breath and go within, and you're like, that is the place of torture.
Yeah, my goodness.
Truly, that is not when the first step for me. And I get that there's different interpretations of what within means, but the first step for me is actually to go to the big blue sky and hold this whole experience, because my body has in many ways become a place of torture. It's like, this place has been scary. And I love and appreciate my body, and I love that it's brought so many, virtues through this experience. But if I'm panicked, I can't go within. The stillness is out here in the awareness, not in the breath. So, yeah.
I think that's really profound in itself. And it's, life to a degree is all about finding what works for you and the best way to manage your own suffering. And it definitely sounds like, you've tried and tested a whole heap of stuff and you've been on this journey. What's this kind of done to your hope? And I guess, how do you feel like it's built upon your resilience?
Boy, okay, I'll tell you, I am so much more resilient than I used to be. And I just read this amazing article in the New York Times by Dr. Becky Kennedy. Have you heard of her? She's got millions of followers. And anyway, she's a clinical psychologist, and she works mostly with parenting, but she wrote this incredible article that was like, the point, the goal of parenting is to not make your children happy. That was the title of the article, or something to that nature. And her reason is because the more that we focus on being happy, the less tolerance we have for distress in our lives. And the more we're going to search for a feeling, any other feeling than distress, which is basically the recipe for anxiety. So I was always seeking feeling good. I would equate feeling good instead of happiness, but feeling good in my body. I was a dancer, I've always wanted to feel good. And the smallest thing would just ruin me. So I had no resilience for just being okay with the 7, 8, 9 days, being okay with not being okay. No tolerance for it. And I don't know if that was my parenting style or what, but I did not build a tolerance for the yucky emotions and the yucky sensations of life. So yes, my resilience is way expanded. My hope, however, I don't even use that word anymore. I have a lot of people in the Unfixed community that use that word, and I deeply respect their relationship to it. But for me, hope is takes the agency out of me. It's passive. It's not active. It has, to me, it connotes sort of that magical thinking that something outside of myself is going to somehow change the circumstances. and I know everybody has a different relationship to that word, but for me, I need in my journey to not have hope, but to have an openness for what is. That to me is much more, it's just healthier for me than to put it outside of myself.
Yeah. And so I guess based on that, would you say that you're sort of no longer on that spiritual path? You wouldn't consider yourself a spiritual person anymore?
I would say I'm deeply spiritual, but that's such a tough word. To me, spirit is the essence of love and our ability to connect with all living creatures on this planet through love. And so if that's what we're talking about, then that's definitely, I'm very spiritual, but it's not, I don't have a sense that something's going to happen to me when I die. I don't have a sense that anybody's listening to me right now when I'm talking.
Hey, look, I am.
I mean, you are.
Lots of other people will be. Maybe not.
My cat is right here.
That's the most important, listener. Got to keep the cat happy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm still a little, magical fairy unicorn girl in my heart. I wish that I had dead ancestors that were showing up at the foot of my bed and, sprinkling fairy dust on my life. I wish for that. But man, it just always makes me feel so empty because I don't feel like and I know people have those magical experiences in their lives, but for me, I just don't feel like I do.
You are so refreshingly honest. Honestly, this is that realism coming back in. It's so good to hear. And I think it's a path that a lot of people go down at some point and, exploring spirituality, and everyone's definition of that word is different, as you say. But I think, kind of putting blind faith into a greater power to come along and, do the work for you, it can really throw people off course. And, almost, to use a word that you used, it can be quite passive. Mm-hmm. And it can almost be, let's just outsource the healing to somebody else and kind of relinquishing the responsibility. So I think, it's really astute of you to kind of separate the two, kind of the spirituality, but the hope particularly is something that's, something that you don't necessarily subscribe to or identify with as much anymore.
Exactly.
I'd love to talk a bit about Unfixed now. And so Unfixed Media, founded in 2019, is that right? Mm-hmm. And I love the whole premise of what it stands for and, celebrating our imperfections and celebrating our kind of beautiful brokenness and celebrating who we are without trying to fix things, in essence. Can you tell us a little bit more about Unfixed Media and the philosophy behind it?
Yeah. It started because it actually started as Unfixed Film. And that's because it was a film. It was going to just be a documentary. And it was through my own hunger to speak with other people that were learning how to live in their unfixedness, live with their chronic conditions, because I didn't have any mentors in my life that were going to show me that path. I finally had just said, I'm going to learn to live with this. I'm going to stop, searching for shamans and doctors all over the planet. I'm just going to learn to live with this. And I didn't know how. So I put up some flyers around Portland and said, anybody want to talk to me about this? And I found a few people, and then we put it out on the internet, and suddenly I had 50 interviews with people all over the world. And I thought, this is really interesting and I want to learn from them. So I thought, let's do a documentary. And 2 months into that, after filming two lovely gentlemen kind of in this area before we had funding, the pandemic happened. And I thought, oh no, I really wanted to learn from all these people. So how do we do this? And so I ended up teaching them all to film themselves. And we've got these amazing phones in our pockets, and they're actually great devices. And actually, to the pandemic's credit, I think it ended up being a real blessing in disguise, because we have found so much transparency and intimacy from these subjects, because they've been able to put their phones up in the privacy of their own bedrooms, in their homes, and talk as if they're just talking to themselves. And boy, it was so just moving to feel this community all of a sudden coming forward with all different types of conditions. This was terminal diagnoses, persistent migraines, Crohn's disease, ALS, cancer, and all different ages. And so we just we turned it into a docuseries, because I didn't know when the pandemic was going to be over. So we started doing monthly questions, and they would answer a question, record themselves, and send it off to me. And then we would edit them together into short videos, and we post them on the Unfixed community YouTube channel. And that was the beginning. And we're 2 years into that now. And now they're my family. But then we've grown from there. We have a mini series that grew out of that, because an organization wanted a similar model, but they wanted it to be done with just vestibular patients, and which was very near and dear to my heart. So we cast 9 new people and went through a similar process with them. Anyway, and those projects just keep snowballing from that. So, and just to go back to like what Unfixed was, and why I decided to call it that. It's to me, it's really the state of being unfixed is really different than being sick. Even though many of us, first of all, everybody is unfixed, right? Because we're going to die. But when we're talking about the chronic illness population, I do believe that it's a different than being sick. It's more of a psychological state that accompanies a medical condition, but it's not like bound by it. So it's liberating ourselves from the expectations of how a life should be lived and how a body should feel. To me, I felt like I had to feel a certain way in order to live fully. And this is kind of the unfixed state is giving us permission to exist exactly as we are. So it's an empowering word, but I know it's also triggering. I've had people email me and say, I hate that word. I'm not unfixed. It's controversial.
Yeah.
People want to be fixed. And I get it. I'm not saying someone offered me a cure. It's not like be like, no, thanks. But it's a much more, I don't want to say fluid, but it allows me to be okay with who I am in this process of living with this condition.
Yeah. I just love all of the work that you're doing. And I think one of the things that I've noticed and I think is, incredibly unifying and connecting is the very different kind of perspectives that participants and, people that you speak to have. I'm in particular at the moment, I'm thinking about your MS Confidential initiative, where you've got, is it 4 different sufferers of MS, and they come together and they kind of share their stories and their outlooks. And I just found it amazing to bring together a group of people who are experiencing something quite similar, but then also their experience is very much individual as well in the way that they're kind of facing it. Can you tell us a little bit more about MS Confidential?
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love MS Confidential. And it grew out of one of the original subjects in Unfixed docuseries. Her name is Elizabeth Jameson. She's had very progressive multiple sclerosis for 30 years now. She was an attorney. And then when she lost some of the ability to some of the cognition started to fall away with the early diagnosis of MS. So she couldn't practice as a lawyer anymore. So she became an artist and took her MRIs, which were these scary black and white images, and started making these beautiful pieces of art with them and coloring them in the ways that she felt like gave her agency around her own medical brain scans. And then she lost the use of her hands. So she couldn't do art anymore. And so now she's a quadriplegic, and she speaks all over the country. And she had this idea of, I want to have a group of people together and discuss these different topics in a very candid, she's not afraid to swear. She's not afraid to talk about sex. She just kind of goes for it. And so we brought these 4 people together, and she asked if she needed help to do this. And so I thought, why not? Let's jump in. And so, just the other day, I read somewhere, somebody called MS they called it the snowflake disease. So similar to what you just said, everyone's experience of MS is different. And you probably could say something similar about all disorders. But I think with MS in particular, there really are these unique experiences. And so Elizabeth is in her 60s, and she's a quadriplegic. And then we have a 30-year-old who's a paraplegic, and he was diagnosed when he was just 21.
Wow.
And he has an incredible Instagram. It's called Gotta Keep Going. He's hilarious.
Oh, check it out.
Yes, people adore him. So Gotta Keep Going is his handle. And then Jessica is pursuing her PhD in art. And then Dr. Annie Brewster is an MS patient herself, but also a Harvard-trained physician. And so you've got these really unique perspectives. Yeah. And we've been doing this for 6 months now. And boy, they are so tender and dear with each other. I get jealous. I watch, the shows, and I'm like, I want that. I want more vestibular patients to come together, because their conversations are really raw and intimate, and tears and laughter and everything in between.
Yeah. And I think that's the sort of conversations that should be not only being had, but being shared. So, people can relate to each other and understand and see that there is no right way to be on this path. And I think for me, it's particularly close to my heart because I grew up with a father who has multiple sclerosis. And similarly to you, I am a bit of a fixer, or, I'm a recovering fixer. I've definitely learned through my dad's condition that people deal with things very, very differently. My dad has a fairly different natural disposition to me, which I guess is just slightly more of the ilk that this is it, there's no point trying to optimize anything because this is the hand that I've been dealt. Whereas I'm kind of there like, what about the oxygen tanks? What about clinical acupuncture? What about this CBD oil? Like all of this stuff. But I've really learned to take a step back from doing that, because you have to meet people where they're at. And as much as I can empathize, and, of course, I want to see people flourish and live the best quality of life that they can, that's available to them. You can't force people into doing things. And so just the kind of, I guess, relinquishing that fixing mentality from the standpoint of somebody who is a supporter of somebody, close to them. That's been a really big learning for me.
There's a doctor, sorry to interrupt, but do you know Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen?
No.
She's written a bunch of books, but you would appreciate, she's just a lovely older woman. She's not practicing anymore, but she had Crohn's disease herself. And she started realizing as a physician that her power to cure was only a really small part of her ability to heal people. Healing doesn't even necessarily mean that you're going to cure them. And that she feels like pill popping and the curing business is much too small of a strategy for the loss that people feel when they get a chronic disease diagnosis, because that's really what a diagnosis is. It's not just a set of symptoms that you're going to be living with, it's a loss. Mm-hmm. And I don't think physicians are trained to work with the loss that this patient is going to be experiencing for years and, ahead of, and then, so curing is just this like really small strategy for this whole lifetime of changes that's about to happen. Yeah. So I think if we can all think about, like, we can have healing presence with people, even if we can't cure them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really, that's a beautiful way of putting it, a healing presence, because I think ultimately it is kind of, the human connections and just knowing that you have a network or a community or, safe people who, if push came to shove and you wanted to talk about it and you wanted to just let it all out, then you've got that kind of safe space to do so. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really, I'm just sitting with that for a moment.
Well, and it goes back to even while you're sitting with that, it's like that Dr. Becky that I was telling you about earlier that teaches the parenting, she was saying in this article, okay, so your kid your kid is building a tower and then the tower falls down. The parent that only wants happiness for their child or fixing is going to go and build it with them again. And the parent that is more concerned about their resilience and building their capacity to deal with frustration, that parent is going to go to the blocks and say, wow, what a bummer. But I'm not going to abandon you in this. Like, that's the pain of frustration, is that go deal with it yourself. But to be able to go to that child and say, I see that you're experiencing frustration or you're feeling sad about that. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm here with you to just feel those feelings. Mm-hmm. Like, that is such a different strategy than, okay, let's fix it.
Yeah. So I guess, would that be your key tip for somebody who might be, supporting somebody through a chronic illness?
Yeah. I think we actually did a video on that one. We did an episode called What to Say When You Don't Know What to Say. And the subjects had some really great answers. But number one, I think it really is to just be present and non-judgmental. Holding is healing presence.
Mm-hmm. Gorgeous.
I think that's holding is healing.
Yeah. And I guess, what guidance could you offer listeners who potentially are going through that journey themselves of possibly having an undiagnosed disorder? There are symptoms there. They're currently in that process. What would your kind of key tip be for people in that situation?
Well, first of all, my heart goes out to you. And maybe that is the first key tip is be compassionate with yourself. There's nothing wrong with you. And you didn't do something wrong to make you feel this way. And you're doing everything you can to feel better, and be kind to that process. Be kind to yourself. And but I also, if there's an openness to just being curious about the experience too, that's Elizabeth Jameson, the woman I was speaking about with MS. She has had 30 years to practice this, but she really is curious about the process, the degradation of her body, the disease process in her body. And she's almost like a scientist that now is able to kind of observe some of the deterioration of her body in a real objective way. And she's an artist, it really is making her kind of appreciate. I've heard her say, I really appreciate this slow deterioration that she's gone through, because it's offered her an ability to just get curious about it. And, I mean, why are we here? I don't know. I have no idea. But if it's your experience, we might as well get friendly with it.
Yeah, completely. I mean, she sounds like an incredible person. And I'm really trying to stay away from using the term inspiring, because I know that you've got a very, very interesting take on, these, painting these glorious people as inspirations. And you've coined this wonderful term, which I love, which is inspiration porn. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that?
Well, I can't give myself credit for it. I've heard it somewhere else too, inspiration porn. And in fact, it's used a lot, I think, in the chronic illness community, but probably similar to Australia. But here in the US, media doesn't have a lot of tolerance for any story of disability that doesn't involve this heroic ending. We've got to get to the top of Everest with one limb. What about all the people that are going to stay at the bottom of Everest and build community and cook for each other and share and learn and grow their hearts? Like, that doesn't make for a really good Hollywood arc. And so we don't have many models for that. Sarah Rainey, I know I recommended this book for you, the Ladies' Handbook.
I cannot put it down, honestly. It is.
Have you gotten into her? Yeah,
the diagnosis.
Have you gotten to the part about where where she talks about the heroine's journey?
Not yet.
Well, okay, you have the treat ahead of you, because she kind of steps back from this whole journey. And I don't know if you know about like Joseph Campbell's work with the hero's journey, which is very masculine based, which is, you kind of got this quest, you go out, you conquer, you come back to the village, and everything is just glorious. And the heroine's journey, which is Sarah equates to the journey of many of us with chronic illness, is much more cyclical. So we descend. And in the descent, we go into isolation, we go into despair, we grieve. And then we also foster some qualities that, nurture some parts of ourselves while we're down there. And then we emerge, not renewed completely, but we come back with some treasures to share. And then the cycle repeats itself, and we go back and we descend again, just like nature and the seasons. And it's such a better metaphor for chronic illness. I mean, sure, some people do have cures, and we have lots of movies about that, where somebody has this disease and then there's this medical intervention and then they're better and everyone's happy at the end of the movie. But that's not chronic illness.
Yeah. And I think it's a much more pragmatic way of doing things, by kind of saying, hey, this is the journey. It's messy. It's not neat. It's not, here's the protagonist. Here's the part that they play. They go on and then they heal. And then it's all, there's a shiny bow on the end. I think it's really good to remind ourselves that the process and the journey, that sometimes is the destination. And we don't need to be like looking forward to this fix and to this cure and to be getting to a certain place, and just living kind of day by day. I'm so grateful to you for having introduced me to that book, because since our last conversation, I ordered it straight away. Good old Amazon Prime. It was there the next day. And I think I'm probably, that was only a few days ago that it arrived. But yeah, I'm probably around a third of the way through. It's just one of those page turners.
And she's hilarious too, right?
Oh God. Her articulation of what is a pretty harrowing story is like, it's phenomenal. She has got such a good sense of humor. Oh, I would love to
interview her. I will introduce the two of you, because she's lovely. And
Kimberly, thank you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
I would absolutely love that. I already feel connected to her through reading the book. There's a lot of really relatable things, and I think a lot of women will get a lot from that book. It's called, just for listeners, for the benefit of the listeners, it's called the Women's Handbook to Mysterious Illnesses? Did I get that right?
That's close. It's close.
Oh, gosh, go on.
The Ladies' Handbook for Mysterious Illnesses.
Beautiful. Thank you. It's a brilliant book. Great recommendation from you. So thank you very much for that. Kimberly, I am a little bit conscious of time. I wondered whether you would mind, because I know that we've spoken before a little bit about around the same time that you started to have symptoms, there were a couple of key events in your life that potentially could have triggered it. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what happened around that time in your life?
Yeah, I am quite certain that this didn't just occur out of nowhere. I definitely already had an autoimmune disease, and I think I already had a nervous system that was wired to panic and freeze. And so there wasn't that resiliency built in. But so I mentioned early in our conversation that my father who raised me, he was a cardiac surgeon, and he died suddenly in a car accident when I was in high school. And I just was so deeply in love with my father, and we had a very special bond. And in my magical thinking, I decided, well, I'm going to keep him alive by becoming a physician myself. And, he's closer to me now, even though because he's dead, because now he can be with me all the time. And I didn't allow myself to go into the despair at all. I just went straight to college and was like, I'm going to become a doctor. And, 4 years later, I was diagnosed with Graves' disease, autoimmune disease. And I think it was wearing my system down. But I had this deep loyalty to him and commitment to keeping him alive. And fast forward 20 more years, in my 40th year, everybody has their 23andMe and Ancestry.com tests and all of that. I took a DNA test with my brother because there had been a joke in our family that I had a different father. It was never like something anybody pursued, but it was a joke just because. Why was it even a joke? I'm not even remembering right now, but it was just this weird joke. My parents had an open marriage for a while. Yeah. Like they did their hippie thing.
Yeah.
And anyway, but we didn't believe it. And my dad was my dad. So I took this DNA test with my brother as a fun thing to do. And he came back as my half brother.
Wow.
So,
so my God.
That was, but back up. So I was already on bed rest when I took that DNA test. I was in a pretty horrific bicycle accident early 2014, where a car door opened in the bike lane, and I flew over the car door, and I broke my pelvis, and I cracked my head, and I'd never broken a bone in my life. And all of a sudden I was on bed rest for 2 months. And that same week, right before the accident, I'd had a really long conversation with my mom about this person that she had had a one-night fling with. And he was a musician and this free spirit, and his name was Charlie, but she never remembered anything else about him, like his last name or whatever. And then all of a sudden she remembered his last name. And I Googled it, and I saw this photograph of this man, and I was like, because he was a musician, so he had albums. And I was like, that looks like me.
Oh, wow.
And that was 5 days before the bicycle accident. And it kind of gave me this like energy to sort of do the Google sleuthing thing. And it made me really uncomfortable. Something in my intuition already knew that something was off. Something was here, and I needed to pursue it, but I didn't like it. But I did it anyway, almost obsessively a little bit. And anyway, so when the bicycle accident happened, it kind of went out of my mind. But then as time went on, it started to surface again, and I did a little more Googling and found out that he had died in a sailing accident, and found his family on Facebook. And I thought, let's just do this DNA test as a joke, because it really can't be true.
Yeah, keep the joke going. Why end it now?
Exactly. But, as you know, ended up that this man was my father.
Wow.
So it really, I always talk about it as the foundation of my body, my pelvis was broken, had a crack in it. And then the foundation of my identity suddenly had this big crack in it. And so the two of those coinciding and happening at the same time was enough to really destabilize my nervous system.
Yeah.
And then because I sometimes am really impulsive, I reached out to the family, not right away, but eventually. And I wrote them this really long, heartfelt letter and just said, you sounds like from what I can tell, you really loved your brother. You might want to know that he left something behind. And they were so embracing and so warm, but it happened so fast. And all of a sudden I had this whole new family and I was barely even walking again. And I think I wasn't integrating any of it. I was almost like manic a little bit. So it's not surprising to me that very shortly after some of these conversations started with my new family, the dizziness symptoms started.
It's a lot to take on board for any human being.
Yeah. It was, I don't know how I would have done it any differently. And I'm so lucky that they were so loving and still are very much a part of my life now. But I think it was just all too much, too soon, too something.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And like I said, I didn't have that emotional resilience built into me yet. It was kind of like, I didn't know how to grieve. All of a sudden I had to grieve my dad all over again.
Yeah.
In a different way.
And can we just pick up on the way in which your biological father passed away and the synergies between, I might just let you speak to that because we've very briefly spoken about it in the past and it's quite unbelievable.
Bizarre, right? Yeah. I mean, he died in a sailing accident. So his last experience was on a boat.
And now your entire experience is on a boat.
On a boat. I mean, he was, I don't know if you can see, not that the listeners can, but those two banjos on the wall there, one of those is my biological father's banjo. One of them is mine. And I had that banjo before. Not like every woman picks up a banjo. It's kind of an odd instrument.
It's quite niche.
Kind of odd. Not that I'm good or anything, but he was excellent. He had a TV show. He was a poet. He was very much like me. And when the family now, we've connected many times and they're like, oh man, you're so much like your father.
Wow. I feel like, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but just knowing what I know about you and the kind of whole philosophy behind Unfixed media, it almost feels like it's the perfect amalgamation between your dad that you grew up with and your biological dad, because you've got that kind of the healthcare and that element to it, but then also you've got this real creativity, which obviously has just been coming out, your entire life. And Unfixed feels like the perfect combination of both of those things.
I think that's super insightful of you. And you just reminded me, my parents, like I said, they had their hippie thing. So when we were born, they did these astrology charts for us. And I don't remember anything about my chart except for this one page that talked about how I am going to be most happy if I somehow integrate science and art together, like health and creativity. Those two need to be combined for me. And that was, I remember reading that and thinking, well, when I was in medical school, I'm like, I don't know what am I supposed to do? Like medical drawings?
Well, you're right. Done it. You've manifested it. And I actually have, sorry, you go ahead.
Oh, I just, like you said, it's entirely both fathers. One was in the medical world and one was entirely in the artistic world.
Yeah. It's occurrences like that in a life that do make you think that there might be some kind of higher power. Just, you know, there's just the synergies and the synchronicity of things.
I'll tell you one unusual part about it too, just for fun. My husband's name is David Charles, middle name Charles. My father that raised me, his name was David, and my biological father's name is Charles.
No.
And I've been with my husband for like 16 years. So this is not, you know, I didn't go handpick him.
Subliminally, just look. Wow. That's incredible. That's incredible. One of my friends has just she's been studying astrology actually, just to pick up on something you said before, and she's just started doing birth chart reading. But I should put you in touch with her. You should see how the charts, what the chart is saying for you now. Yeah, exactly. I've got mine stashed away somewhere. I think this was 46 years ago somebody wrote this, so it'd be interesting. It's, you know, my brother and I, like I said, we both had it done, and there's some accurate things in there. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's definitely something to it. Now, I am acutely aware that most of our conversation has been around, you know, your condition, and I guess some of the traumas that you faced throughout your life and the beautiful coming to fruition of Unfixed Media. But I'm also very aware that Unfixed stands for, you know, not necessarily hanging your identity on your diagnosis and not hanging your identity or your sense of self around these things that have happened to you. So I guess I would love to know, outside of all of the stuff that we've just spoken about, who is Kimberly Warner? And that could be the most random or innocuous or ridiculous thing that you could possibly tell me about yourself. It doesn't need to be profound. It can just be anything that you want to tell me. I am a cat lover. I'm going to be a crazy cat lady someday. I love cat. I mean, I love all animals, but I am nuts. I would be a terrible mother because I have spoiled them rotten. And I have no boundaries with them. I have turned them into dogs. Basically, they play like puppies. They play fetch with me. It's awesome. Best of both worlds. I mean, it's great. It's great. But I mean, it's like clockwork. Twice a day now we have to go upstairs and play. And it doesn't matter if I have guests or if I have a deadline, they will let me know that it is time to play. And I can't say no to those cute little faces. I just love how they give zero, you know, they just don't care. They just don't care. They don't have any boundaries. They steamroller all over what you want to do. They'll come and just sit in the most inconvenient location, and they don't care. That's just who they are. They own who they are, and they just show up like that every day. Isn't that refreshing? Don't you want to be like that? Yeah. I want to be a cat. I want to be a cat. I know. We need to figure out how to channel that cat energy. Maybe I'll try and find some sort of cat specialist to come on the show at some point to tell us how we can all channel our inner tabby cat. Now, Kimberly, just you've already given us so much, but I guess just to round out the conversation a little bit, and I guess being mindful of the fact that my listeners might not necessarily be experiencing a chronic illness or not necessarily be going through that journey, but we have to acknowledge that everybody in life goes through their challenges with their health, be it mental, physical, or otherwise. So I guess what kind of tips for life could you leave us with that just really unlock or enhance our capacity to just be, just live a little better? Yeah, I think number one is just open to the experience and be okay with not being okay. It's really, really, really radically okay to not be okay. And I'm not saying it doesn't suck, but the sucking is okay. And in that okay, it's like not being okay, it's unlocking something in us that
deepens compassion, deepens understanding for one another. It bonds us to one another. We're all human. How do we know how to hold another person's suffering if we don't know how to hold our own suffering? So it's okay to not be okay.
Thank you. That was, that was perfect. So we're just coming into the final part of the show where I ask all of my guests the same questions, and I look for them to be answered as succinctly as possible. So ideally in a sentence or a word or less, but if you're feeling creative and you're struck with a spark of inspiration, then go for your life. Okay. Are you ready for the quick fire round?
Ready. Mm-hmm.
Okay. First question. What is the best advice you have been given?
Best advice? Mm-hmm. It may be healthier to eat beer and Franks with cheer and thanks than to eat sprouts and bread with doubts and dread. And my worst advice is just think positive.
That was awesome. Thank you so much for that. Okay, next question. What is the biggest lesson that you've learned?
I've reiterated this many times, but you can be in pain and joyful at the same time. You can feel awful physically and still have a meaningful, purposeful life, and sometimes even feel joy.
Who or what inspires you the most?
The Unfixed community, without a doubt. When by the Unfixed community, I mean people who are embracing the paradoxes of life and living fully with them. People who are suffering well.
What is your daily well-being routine, if there is one?
Playing with cats.
It's important.
Hiking in the woods. Stopping work every day by 4. I just cut it off. And reading before bed.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one. Such a good kind of decompress at the end of a day. And finally, what does being mean to you?
Being is just opening to the experience and being curious about it.
Beautiful. Kimberly Warner, at the risk of putting you on the inspiration porn pedestal, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I kind of thought before getting into it that we might just go off and explore different directions and tangents. And I really feel like, even though I've only very recently been introduced to you, I do feel like I've known you for a really long time. And I feel very connected to you and very connected to what you're doing and the mission and the values that you display. I feel super grateful that you've taken the time to speak to me today. And I hope it won't be the last time.
It will not be the last time, Charlotte. I feel like you're my sister. So sister from my Southern Hemisphere sister.
Yes.
Yes. I feel like this is a to be continued.
Absolutely. And where is the best place that listeners can find you?
Unfixedmedia.com has all the programming that we're doing right now. You can subscribe to our newsletter there, and that will keep you abreast to the new programming that we have coming up in 2022, some new mini-series, lots of exciting stuff. So that's Unfixed Media and the newsletter are the place. And you can also subscribe to the YouTube channel from there and watch all of the shows.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll pop all of that in the show notes anyway.
Okay.
Kimberly, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Wishing you the best with this podcast, your beautiful soul. And I'm so overjoyed that you're doing this work. It's going to change lots of lives.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. It means a lot. Thank you.
Bye-bye.